Good morning, everybody, and welcome to week 7 of our remote learning experience. We're going to be starting the nervous system today, so we're sort of changing gears. We're going to a new section of biology where it sort of turns a little bit into what Bio 20 used to be with part function, and we'll get into the nervous system, and the nervous system is going to be connected to the endocrine system or the hormone system, and then eventually we'll end up with reproduction and human development. So the nervous system, the reason why we teach it together with the endocrine system is that both of these systems are responsible for communication in the body. And they communicate with different parts of the body in order to maintain balance. So we're going to call that homeostasis. So when it comes to the nervous system, we say that together with the endocrine system, and in brackets here, I'm going to remind you that's just your hormones. And we'll talk about hormones. We'll get into the endocrine system, and we'll talk in detail about hormones. So together with the endocrine system, the nervous system regulates structures and processes in the body to maintain, and we're gonna say that's homeostasis. Now, we already talked about the word static. We already said what it means to be static. Static means unchanging, right? So the conditions remain the same. Homeo means internal. So what we're dealing with here is we're wanting some sort of internal balance. So homeostasis stands for internal balance. So an example here would be, it's 40 degrees outside, or even minus 40 degrees outside, and your body temperature remains at 37 degrees Celsius. You haven't eaten in a while and your blood sugar level drops, and so we're going to need your body to release sugar so that your cells can feed themselves. Okay, so that's that internal balance. It doesn't matter what is going on around, your body is always aware of what's happening, and it always tries to balance itself out, to even things out. Okay, so that's homeostasis. And we said we need both the nervous and the endocrine system, so let's have a look at why. Both of these, we said that they are communication systems. They help your body communicate with itself. If there is a problem going on, the body needs to know that there's a problem, and then it needs to generate a solution and send that solution over to that area, communicate what the solution is. So the nervous system, the thing about it is that this is, the responses, the communication is very quick. However, it's not just all good. The responses are quick, but they are short lasting. So they don't last a very long time, okay? Whereas when it comes to the endocrine system, the responses are slow, but long lasting. So I'll give you an example. If there's a puck coming at my face, I don't want the endocrine system to kick in. I don't want to use adrenaline, because in that point, it would take way too long for those hormones to circulate through my body to send the message that there's a puck coming at my face. So in that case, what I would want is I would want the nervous system. Quick response, doesn't have to last long, because once I avoid the puck, everything is done. I don't have to worry about it. But if I'm short on sugar, if I'm having one of those times where you're getting your second wind, you're kind of sluggish after lunch and everything, and I need that kick of sugar, I don't necessarily need it immediately, but I need it to last a long time. I need to make sure that my cells are being fed. And so in that case, I'm not relying on the nervous system. I'm relying on things like insulin and glucagon. Those are hormones, and that's the endocrine system's job. Okay, so depending on which response is needed, your body is constantly making that decision. And we're going to see that there is a section of your brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is what I call your body's complaint box. Anytime something is going awry in the body, the hypothalamus hears about it. And then it's the hypothalamus that makes a decision, is this a job for the nervous system or is this a job for the endocrine system? And it responds accordingly. Okay? Now, the nervous system is made up of the brain, the spinal cord, and a bunch of neurons bunched together called nerves. There is a particular organization to the nervous system. And for that, I'm going to rely on a picture that a lot of times would show up on a diploma exam, and you would have to fill it out. It would have some blanks, and you would be asked to fill this out. Okay, so when we see here, we see the nervous system is our general term, our big, large, what we call the umbrella term. And then we can divide it into two main divisions. There is the central nervous system, and then there is the peripheral nervous system. In the periphery means surrounding. So the central is kind of in the middle, the peripheral surrounds that. And the central nervous system is made up of your brain and your spinal cord. So both of those are very central to the functioning of the nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system, so the one on the periphery on the outside, is made up of two branches. There is the autonomic nervous system, and then there's the somatic nervous system. Here we're going to make a couple of little notes. So for example, the fact that your autonomic nervous system is involuntary. So you don't control that. It'll have things like breathing and blinking and heart rate and swallowing. Those kinds of things are not things that you have to think about. You're not sitting there watching these videos going blink or beat to your heart. It's something that it's happening involuntarily, whereas the somatic nervous system is under voluntary control. Okay. Me moving my arms and looking at the screen and speaking, that's a voluntary nervous system. So when it comes to the voluntary or the somatic nervous system, two branches divided. The sensory branch. So the sensory branch is responsible for bringing information in. I can feel if it's cold, if I'm, if the music is too loud, if the light is too bright, those kinds of information, those kinds of things are coming in through the sensory branch of the somatic. And the motor instead, this is the one that responds to stimuli. So if I'm sitting here and I have an itch on my shoulder, that's the sensory nervous system bringing that information into the nervous system. And my motor is the one that is going to scratch the itch. It's responding to whatever that stimulus might be. Okay? The autonomic nervous system, the involuntary one, it's a little bit more complicated. And with that, we have two branches to that as well. So when it comes to the involuntary, what we have is we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. These guys are also known as your stress response. So your involuntary nervous system responds to stresses to your body. And that stress could be anything from, there's a dog chasing you, at the park, or anything from the stress might be I went to exercise. So I did that to myself. The body can't tell the difference between stresses. If I'm cold, if I'm hot, if I feel like there's danger coming through. And so, your body responds to stresses in two ways. The sympathetic nervous system, this is the one that prepares your body for a stress. This is also what you would call the fight or flight response. Now they expanded that. They call it the fight or flight or freeze, because some people freeze when they are faced with a stress. But what we're saying in this case, when we're preparing our body for a stress, think about what happens when you have a dog that is chasing you, and things like, for example, increased heart rate, increased respiration. We're trying to get more oxygen to our muscles, right? We're going to be converting more stored sugar into a form that is available for our cells to use. We'll get into the details of what the sympathetic nervous system does, but we're preparing our body to either fight, to address the stress, or flight, or get out of there, right? Avoid it. And the parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, this one is the one that returns the body back to normal. And really, after a stress. So it returns the body back to normal after a stress. This has also a catchy little name. It's called the rest and digest response. And the reason for that is when you're in fight or flight response, obviously you're not in a resting position, you're in a fighting or in a flighting position, and your digestive system shuts down. I don't need to be digesting food while there's a dog chasing me, or a bear, or whatever, right? So then once that stress is done, then we get into the second portion, which is the rest and digest, getting the body back to its functions and what it was doing before, okay? And for this one, what I tend to think about is I tend to think of a parachute, parasympathetic. I think of a parachute that sort of slows you down after you've been in free fall. Okay, so that's how I remember that it returns your body back to normal after a stress. Okay, so those are the divisions of the nervous system. We'll get into talking about in detail about the brain and the spinal cord, and then we'll address the peripheral nervous system all at once later. Okay, so in order for us to understand the functioning of the nervous system, we have to look at the cells that make up the nervous system. They are that functioning unit. Without those particular cells, the nervous system would do nothing. So cells of the nervous system and there are two types of cells that make up the entire thing. One of them, and this one is not going to be as important as the other one, but we need to mention it, is going to be glial cells. And the second one is going to be neurons. And you can probably tell that the neurons are the important one. This is the one that we need to make sure that we know. So we're going to start with the neurons because I want you to know what the function of the neurons is, and then we'll talk about what is the job of a glial cell. So when it comes to neurons, they are the ones that are going to collect information and respond to stimuli. So they are responsible for the communication that happens within the body, okay? And they do so using what are known as electrochemical signals called impulses. So you might have heard of a nervous impulse, right? So a nerve impulse or a nervous impulse is just an electrochemical signal. And we're going to see these words electrochemical. So neurons are going to use both electricity to communicate within the nervous system, and they're also going to be use chemicals in order to communicate within the nervous system. Okay, so those are going to be those neurons, and we're going to look at the neurons in detail in just a second. Now, when it comes to the glial cells are what I call nanny cells. And we're going to see there are several examples of nanny cells in the body, but here in the nervous system, we have this one. So these glial cells, what they do is they take care of neurons. So that's why I call them nanny cells. So they nourish neurons, they remove their waste, and they protect against infections, invaders. Okay, so it's sort of a supportive role. So we have, the main actor, and then we have the supportive role that is there to make sure that the actor can do the job. Okay, so the neuron needs the glial cells because if any wastes accumulate, if they don't get nourished, or if they get an infection, obviously they can't function properly. And so they need it, but they are the main star. They're the ones that are going to make sure that the nervous system works. And neurons are organized in bundles called nerves. There we go. So they're called nerves. And I'm going to show you again. I'm going to have a picture of what a nerve looks like. Okay. So you can see here it's a bundle, and this bundle is made up of connective tissue. So this yellow part right here is connective tissue. And connective tissue is important because it is tough. So it makes certain that if I hit my hand against something, I don't have nerve damage, right? So these neurons are inside this tough connective tissue that is protective against trauma, against any sort of problems that might come to the neurons, any sort of issues, okay? So we have hundreds of neurons bundled together inside the nerve and wrapped in protective connective tissue. Okay, and here you can see this is a bundle, and inside each one of these bundles I have these neurons. So you can see all of those right there are neurons, and then more and more and more neurons. And then here I have that protective connective tissue that is going to help it against any sort of damage or trauma. Okay, so here we can just sort of so this is connective tissue right here. Okay. Bundles, nerves, and each one of these, this one right here is a single nerve fiber, or we could say this one's a neuron. So each one of these is a neuron. Okay. So let's chat about neurons next. So the neuron, we need to understand this particular cell because it is the functional unit of the nervous system. So what does that mean, functional unit of the nervous system? It means that without this cell, without neurons, the nervous system couldn't function. It couldn't do what it does. So that's what we mean when we say the functional unit of the nervous system. And it is a specialized cell. They're very different from any other cells in your body. That carry messages in the form of those impulses to and from the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. We saw that the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. So they carry messages to and from there. Either they're informing the brain or they're bringing a response back from the brain, okay? And we're gonna see in just a second that they come in different shapes. Sizes and functions. So their neurons are going to have a different function depending on where they're found, what they look like. Okay? Their size depends on how far they have to go for communication, and we'll talk about that as well. All right. So then next, it makes sense for us to explore the structure of neurons. And it doesn't matter what kind of neuron you're dealing with. It might look slightly different, but it'll have the same parts. It'll have all of the same components. So the one that I'm gonna show you right now, this one right here, this one is known as a motor neuron, and we're going to label it. And as we label it, I'm gonna write down sort of the different parts and what they do, okay? So first of all, we need to look at the direction of the impulse, the direction of the communication. And what I need you to know is that a communication always starts here at this end of the neuron, and it always goes in this direction, okay? And what we're going to see in just a second, you don't know the terminology yet, but it always goes from dendrites to synaptic knobs. So here I'm gonna say direction of impulse. And remember that the impulse is just a signal. So direction of the signal is always from that end to that end. And it always goes from dendrites. So we're gonna start labeling from dendrites to synaptic knobs. Okay, so it always goes from the beginning of a neuron, we're gonna have the dendrites, and at the end of the neuron are going to be the synaptic knobs, okay? And we're gonna continue labeling this, and like I said, we're gonna go sort of back and forth. So let's start with the dendrites. So the dendrites are important. These little branches receive information, receive other impulses. I'm actually going to take the word other out here. I'm just going to put impulses, and you'll see why. So they receive information or impulses from other neurons, from previous neurons. Okay, so they collect that information and they pass it down the cell. So they pass it down the neuron. Okay, so their job is to receive impulses from other neurons. And you can see here that we have many, many branches to receive information from other neurons. So that as a communication is coming, these guys are here to collect it. So I always think about a relay race and how, you know, the first runner has a baton and it has to pass the baton over, and the other runner that is running in front has to collect the baton. And you only have 2 sets of hands to collect that baton. But imagine if you had all of these sets of hands so that you could collect the baton here, 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 here. So that race could happen a lot quicker and more effectively. And so when it comes to dendrites, they are actually the measure of your intelligence. The more dendrites you have in your neurons, the more intelligent you are. Intelligence is just the ability to take in information, process it, and generate a response to it. And so the more ability you have to receive that information, the more parts of your brain are touching with each other, they're connected with each other, the more likely you are to find an experience that you can relate to that new information. Oh, I see. This is happening. Have I seen this before? How would I react to it? Is it similar to something else I've seen? Could I approach it in that same way? Could I modify the way that I'm approaching it? So being able to have that many connections in your brain and being able to find information quickly is a measure of your intelligence. So the more dendrites you have, the more intelligent you are. Now, how do you develop dendrites? That's what learning is. Anytime that you experience something new, you hear, you feel, you see something new, your body, your brain will grow branches. It'll grow dendrites. But the problem is, your brain can't be overconnected. Having an overconnected brain, having too many dendrites, can result in a condition known as autism. People that are autistic, their brain is super connected. So everything is connected to everything else. And it's kind of difficult for them to ignore one piece over another. Right now, I am talking to you and I'm focusing on this and I'm focusing on this and what I have to say. And the fan in the background is there, but it's not playing a role. It's not impeding what I have to do. If my brain was overconnected, the stimulus coming from the fan would be just as strong as the stimulus that I'm getting from the iPad that I need to write on, the video that I need to speak to. And so the brain becomes sort of overwhelmed with all of the information. So having a brain that is overconnected, it's not good. So what your body does is it has these little pruning sessions. Anytime that it sees that dendrites haven't been used, if those little roads become dusty, what your brain does is it cuts those dendrites away. So one way for you to keep yourself sharp is to continue practicing. It's to continue stimulating those pathways. And so if you ever looked at those brain games, the ones that you have on your phone or the ones that they show you on television, they are games that are designed for you to continuously stimulate those pathways so they don't get pruned away, so they don't get eliminated. And later on, we'll talk about things like Alzheimer's and how patients with Alzheimer's, they tend to lose certain pathways, and it's not because of their doing, but it's because of a disorder, okay? So we want those dendrites to be stimulated. We want those branches to receive information, and they're going to pass it down to the cell body first. So this is the cell body, and the cell body has a nucleus just like any other cell. And so next we're going to do cell body. So it contains a nucleus, cytoplasm, and all the other organelles, lysosomes, mitochondria, that are needed for metabolic reactions, that are needed for all of the reactions that your cells need to perform to keep the body alive, to keep the organ alive, or tissue, or whatever, okay? So we need those organelles, we need those metabolic reactions to occur. But again, the cell body is going to have a specific function for the nervous system, and that's to prepare all the chemicals. Remember, it's an electrochemical impulse. They're going to prepare the chemicals that are needed for the impulse. It has to go from the dendrites to the synaptic knobs. So I'm going to have to get those things in order. Okay. And then next, we're going to look at the axon, and we're going to end at the axon. I don't want to make the video too long, and then we're going to pick it up again on Wednesday. So here is the axon, and I want you to notice that the axon is running through all the way to the end. So that's the axon. You're going to see it, that long section. And the axon is where the nervous impulse takes place. It starts again at the dendrites, it starts the collection of the nervous impulse, and then it's passed through the cell body. And then the axon is where the nerve impulse is going to start and continue all the way to the synaptic knobs, okay? These axons can be small, as short as 1 millimeter, and they can also be very long. I guess I should put short, not small. They can be short and long. 1 meter plus, depending on how tall you are, you have a particular nerve that runs from your hip all the way down to your ankle, and that's known as your sciatic nerve. You might have had heard some people saying that they had problem with their sciatica or their sciatic nerve, and so that's a nerve that runs from your hip all the way down to your ankle. So depending on how tall you are, that could be over 1 meter in length, and that's all one axon. It's all one neuron, and so that could be over 1 meter long if you're looking at your sciatic nerve. Okay. I'm going to write that down. Example. Sciatic nerve runs from your hip to your ankle. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave it at here for the axon. On Wednesday, we're going to continue. We're going to talk about what is this stuff that we find on the axon. Why does it look like it has little sausage links, little beads all over it? So we'll talk about myelin and also some disorders that can come with myelin. And then we'll finish off labeling our neuron and looking at different types of neurons by function, by size, and by the way that they look. All right, so I hope this is a good introduction for you guys, and we will see you tomorrow if you have any questions on our meet, and if not, we'll continue with the notes on Wednesday. Have a good day.